In the summer of 1940, the British war machine did not look invincible. France had fallen. German aircraft now operated from bases across the Channel, and the Luftwaffe had already helped smash its way through Poland, the Low Countries and France. From Berlin, the problem appeared measurable. Find the RAF, overwhelm its fighter bases, break its resistance, and open the way for invasion. Yet Britain had built something German planners never fully understood. Not a single wonder weapon, but a system. 7 parts of that system repeatedly produced results that did not fit German expectations. The first was the simplest to see and the hardest to appreciate. Britain often knew the Luftwaffe was coming before the Luftwaffe could see Britain. By 1939, chain-home radar stations already stood along much of Britain's eastern and southern coastline. They could detect incoming aircraft at ranges of roughly 80 miles. But radar alone was not the decisive instrument. Germany possessed radar technology too. The British advantage was what happened after the signal appeared. Information from chain-home was passed to Fighter Command headquarters at Bletchley Park, checked and filtered, then sent to the relevant group and sector operations rooms. Once German aircraft crossed the coast, the Observer Corps helped track them visually. Controllers could then scramble only the fighter squadrons required, direct them by radio, and keep other aircraft on the ground, refueling, rearming, or waiting for the next raid. Anti-aircraft guns, searchlights, and barrage balloons were tied into the same defensive structure. This was the Dowding system, named after Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, and it turned warning into controlled action. German intelligence knew Britain had radar. What it failed to grasp was how completely radar had been integrated into fighter command. The Luftwaffe attacked several radar stations during the Battle of Britain, but only the station at Ventnor was disabled for a significant period. On August 15, 1940, Hermann Göring concluded that continuing attacks on the radar sites was of doubtful value. That judgment helped leave the warning network largely intact. This was the contradiction. The towers were enormous, fixed, visible targets. Yet their true value was almost invisible. Britain was not using radar simply to detect aircraft. It was using information to conserve aircraft, pilots, fuel, and time. The Luftwaffe could identify a radar mast as a target on a map. It could not easily destroy the organization behind it. And once Britain had learned how to preserve its fighters, the next problem was producing enough of them to keep the system alive. That next problem was industrial, and in the summer of 1940 it was every bit as important as what happened in the air. The Luftwaffe could shoot down British fighters. What German intelligence repeatedly failed to judge correctly was how quickly Britain could replace them. The scale of the problem had been obvious since France. More than a quarter of Fighter Command's aircraft were lost during the fighting over the Low Countries in France. Yet Britain did not enter the Battle of Britain with a fixed stockpile that could only shrink. On May 17, 1940, Churchill's government created the Ministry of Aircraft Production and put Lord Beaverbrook in charge. His methods were controversial, often abrasive, and not every improvement can be credited to one man. But the system was pushed toward a single urgent purpose: keep operational squadrons supplied with usable aircraft. That meant more than building new Spitfires and Hurricanes. Damaged machines were recovered, repaired, cannibalized when necessary, and returned to service. Factories expanded output. Production was dispersed. Maintenance organizations were pressed to move aircraft through the system faster. By September 1940, the RAF Museum records that Hurricane strength had risen to 32 squadrons, compared with 18 a year earlier. The Imperial War Museum notes the deeper point. During the Battle of Britain, Britain's aircraft industry was producing new fighters and repairing damaged ones at a greater rate than Fighter Command was losing them. This mattered because German assessments were often based on the arithmetic of destruction. If a raid claimed 10 fighters destroyed, then 10 fighters should disappear from Britain's strength. But claims in aerial combat were frequently exaggerated. Damaged aircraft did not always become permanent losses, and British pilots who bailed out over home territory could often return to their units. German pilots shot down over Britain, by contrast, usually became prisoners. By early September, Luftwaffe intelligence believed Fighter Command was close to defeat. It was not. The Germans were looking at the visible damage to airfields, aircraft, and squadrons. They were not seeing the factories, repair depots, maintenance units, transport organizations, and thousands of workers behind them. Radar had helped Britain spend its fighters carefully. Industry made sure there were fighters left to spend. And once those aircraft were in the air, another British advantage was beginning to grow in secrecy: the ability to read parts of the enemy's own communications. That advantage was almost impossible for Germany to measure because, unlike a fighter factory or a radar mast, much of it existed behind locked doors at Bletchley Park. The German armed forces relied heavily on encrypted radio traffic, especially messages protected by the Enigma machine. German operators changed settings regularly, and the number of possible combinations was immense. The system was treated as secure. Yet Britain, building on crucial pre-war breakthroughs passed on by Polish cryptanalysts and shared with the French, turned the problem into an intelligence industry. The government code and cipher school moved to Bletchley Park in 1939. Mathematicians, linguists, engineers, clerks, intercept operators, and members of the women's services were drawn into a process that did far more than simply crack Enigma. British Y stations intercepted enemy wireless traffic around the clock. The material was sent for analysis, where codebreakers searched for weaknesses, reconstructed settings, and combined decrypted messages with traffic analysis and other intelligence. Electromechanical bombs accelerated the search for Enigma settings. The result, when successful, was intelligence distributed under the highest secrecy. The important point is timing. GCHQ records that the first major wartime breakthrough in the regular reading of German traffic came with Luftwaffe messages from the spring of 1940. The system expanded from there. The Imperial War Museum's notes that the Ultra program became increasingly successful from 1941 in penetrating German encrypted radio traffic. But intelligence of this kind created its own problem. Britain could not act on every intercepted message in a way that revealed the source. If German commanders concluded that their cipher system had been penetrated, procedures could be changed and the advantage could disappear. Information therefore had to be assessed, protected, and combined with material from other sources before commanders used it. Bletchley Park was not simply reading messages. It was managing the danger created by knowing too much. That was the element German security assumptions failed to accommodate. Enigma did not need to be broken permanently everywhere, every day for the system to matter. Even partial and intermittent access could reveal patterns. Where units were moving, what commanders were worried about, how communications networks were changing, and eventually what German headquarters believed about Allied intentions. By 1944, British signals intelligence would help the Allies read high-level German communications and measure the success of deception before D-Day. But long before Normandy, Britain had already learned that an enemy transmission could become a weapon without firing a shot. And nowhere would information, patience, and industrial organization matter more than in the struggle that threatened Britain's survival at sea. Britain's survival depended on ships. Food, fuel, ammunition, aircraft components, and raw materials had to cross waters in which German U-boats were trying to do something strategically simple: sink merchant shipping faster than Britain and its allies could replace it. After France fell in June 1940, German submarines gained bases on the Atlantic coast, shortening the journey to the hunting grounds and helping create the period U-boat cruise called the Happy Time. Convoys such as SC-7 and HX-79 suffered devastating losses. The German method worked, and for a time it worked frighteningly well. What changed was not one invention. It was another British system. Merchant ships had been placed under Admiralty control before war was formally declared, and the first Atlantic convoy sailed on September 2, 1939. The principle was counterintuitive only if the ocean was imagined as empty space. Grouping ships together did not create more targets for submarines. It created fewer groups to find, while concentrating escorts around them. Over time, escort groups trained together instead of being assembled at random. Radar began reaching ships and aircraft. Intelligence could route convoys away from known concentrations of U-boats. Coastal command aircraft increasingly worked with naval escorts. The system still had a dangerous weakness: the mid-Atlantic air gap. German submarines could attack far beyond the reach of most land-based aircraft. By 1943, the gap was being closed by very long-range aircraft and escort carriers, while support groups of warships were freed from simply shepherding one convoy and could reinforce battles or hunt submarines aggressively. Imperial War Museums identifies that combination aircraft carriers, very long-range aircraft and roving support groups, as central to the defeat of the U-boats in May 1943. The reversal was severe. In March 1943, Allied shipping losses were still catastrophic. Then, during the battles around the North Atlantic convoys in May, German submarine losses rose sharply. On May 24, Karl Donitz withdrew his U-boats from the main North Atlantic convoy routes. The National Archives records that he later regarded this Black May as marking Germany's defeat in the Atlantic battle. That was the part German operational thinking had failed to solve. The convoy was not merely a defensive formation. It was a moving network connected to intelligence rooms, airfields, escort bases, repair yards and radio stations across Britain and the Atlantic. Every new German tactic entered a system capable of learning from it. And Britain was about to apply that same habit of adaptation to something far more visible, the battlefield itself. On the beaches of Normandy, that adaptation became steel. German coastal defenses had been built around a reasonable assumption. Tanks coming off landing craft would be slowed by mines, soft sand, shingle, concrete obstacles, anti-tank ditches, and fortified positions. The failed Anglo-Canadian raid on Dieppe in August 1942 had shown how deadly those problems could become when armor was trapped and infantry lost its support. Britain took the lesson literally. Instead of asking ordinary tanks to cross extraordinary obstacles, it began modifying tanks for specific obstacles. In 1943, Major General Percy Hobart's 79th Armored Division was given responsibility for developing and operating specialized assault armor. The results looked improvised, sometimes almost absurd. Sherman Crab tanks carried rotating flails to detonate mines ahead of them. Churchill AVREs carried a 29-centimeter petard mortar firing a roughly 40-pound demolition charge against concrete positions. Other AVREs carried fascines to fill ditches, rolled reinforced matting over soft ground, or laid small box girder bridges across gaps. Duplex drive Shermans used flotation screens and propellers so tanks could swim from landing craft toward the beaches. The important fact was not that every machine worked perfectly. They did not. Amphibious tanks were vulnerable to rough seas, specialized vehicles were lost, and the invasion still depended on infantry, artillery, naval gunfire, and enormous Allied air power. What mattered was the philosophy behind the machines. German engineers had spent years creating obstacles intended to force attackers into predictable killing zones. Britain's answer was to turn each obstacle into an engineering problem and assign a vehicle and trained crew to solve it. The 79th Armored Division supported British and Commonwealth forces on D-Day, then continued serving through Northwest Europe. Its equipment was not limited to the beaches. Specialized bridging, mine clearing, and assault vehicles remained useful as the armies crossed rivers, broke fortified positions, and moved deeper into Germany. That was the fifth thing the German defensive system struggled to price correctly. A minefield was supposed to buy time. A ditch was supposed to stop armor. A concrete wall was supposed to channel movement. Against an army carrying its engineering solutions forward under armor, those obstacles could still kill, but they could no longer be assumed to hold. And Britain's next method was stranger still, because instead of breaking a German defense physically, it sometimes persuaded German commanders to defend the wrong place. The sixth was deception. Before D-Day, Operation Fortitude created a fictitious 1st U.S. Army Group in southeast England, complete with dummy equipment, false radio traffic, and double agents feeding Berlin a carefully constructed story. Normandy was a diversion, while the real blow would fall at the Pas de Calais. The deception survived the landings. German commanders continued to hold major formations around Calais because they still expected a second invasion. Imperial War Museums records that units remained tied down there into July. The seventh was what happened after the troops landed. The Allies had chosen beaches without the major ports needed to sustain an army, so British planners helped create ports of their own. 2 artificial Mulberry harbours were towed across the Channel and assembled off Normandy. Mulberry B at Gold Beach remained in use for 10 months, handling men, vehicles, and millions of tons of supplies. Britain had brought part of the port with it. Put the 7 together and the pattern is clear. Radar, aircraft production, code-breaking, convoys, specialized armor, deception, and artificial harbors were not isolated tricks. They were parts of a war machine built to learn, connect information with industry, and solve problems faster than the enemy expected. That did not make Britain invulnerable. It made Britain extraordinarily difficult to finish. If you want more World War II history built from the decisions behind the battles, like the video and subscribe.